大家好，我係海龍啊。咁今日大部分嘅 session 應該都係用中文嚟講，但係你見到我隔離呢兩位係唔識得講中文啦。咁所以，但係佢之後都會 join 佢嘅 sessions 嘅，佢聽得明廣東話嘅。咁同埋佢哋自己有自己秘密武器嘅，佢又用 AI 嚟寫嗰個 app， 就係俾佢做一個 simultaneous translation 嘅，所以必要時你會見到佢會推俾佢睇下。咁 anyway 啦，我哋其實想同大家介紹下，就係我哋係 Hong Kong AI podcast。咁呢個計劃係由我啦、Augustin 啦，同埋呢個朋友啦，Sharp 做 Ricky。咁就我哋發起㗎啦。咁我哋嘅目標係俾大家1個鐘頭嘅訪問，用英文、廣東話、普通話 whatever 你 comfortable 去訪問你咯。咁受訪嘅嘉賓全部都係香港 AI 圈子數一數二嘅頂尖人物。咁希望我哋而家啱啱開始 roll up 啲 podcast， 咁希望大家可以去我哋嘅網站啊 YouTube 度俾個 like 啦、subscribe 啦、留言，同埋我哋係接受點唱嘅，所以有啲咩提議嘅要求啊，係可以嚟同你講。Anyway, so good afternoon everyone, and I will let Augustin and Alex, you introduce yourself.
Okay.
So what do you do beside getting interviewed by me?
Well, this is always a challenge for me because when people ask me what I do, and with AI you can just do so much. And so one of the things we'll be talking about today is sort of picking what to talk about. But I grew up in New York, that's why I have this accent. I worked in Silicon Valley for a while, came to Hong Kong in 2008, and that was right before the great financial crisis. And then worked for American software vendors here, and then in 2023, I talked about a midlife crisis AI in the first episode, and so 2023 my dad dies, I get laid off, and then I try to figure out what I try to do in my life, and that starts my exploration with the I Ching, and so we'll talk to Katie a little bit about that. Yeah.
So you do a lot of consultancy, but in your spare time you use AI to learn I Ching.
That's right. So I maybe we'll get to talk about surgical software, which is a new style of software development.
Okay, well, we'll definitely put a tag on that. Alex, what do you do?
Yes, hi everyone. So my name is Alex. I'm originally from the UK, but I've been living in Hong Kong for 12 years now. So I have a background in enterprise technology as a salesperson, working sort of like financial technology, but I'm also the co-founder of a plant-based food company. But at the moment, and for the last year or so, my focus has been on my company Signal 8, which is an Agentic CRM system for food and beverage suppliers. So it helps busy salespeople, perhaps for a brewery or any kind of food distributor or supplier, but are out in the field, and they can chat with their CRM through voice or just through chatting with it, rather than having to go in through like a complex UI, where nobody really wants to spend time doing that. They want to be doing it immediately to kind of remove that friction. So that's what I'm working on.
So both of you guys are heavy AI practitioners, but from a very different starting point, right?
Yeah, I came from the sort of the enterprise software world, so I used to do consulting and tech support, and then later on architecture and engineering. So I was part of the engineering team. We used Jira. We did all the classical methods of software development. But the way I do software development is quite different than how Alex does it. So I like my hammer. My hammer is Claude Code right now, and I tailor it. I make sure the handle's really smooth, and so on. So my style of development is just focused on a single tool, getting the max efficiency out of that, and Alex has his methods.
So I don't come from what you would call a traditional technical background. I've always had a keen eye on tech. I'm working in enterprise technology and fintech, but I don't come from sort of like a computer science or a programming background. So I think.
So you were not a coder before?
No, I was not a coder. I kind of know like computers and like some of the technical side of things like cloud, but never really kind of like actual like producing it myself.
But both of you now are actually writing programs, and why is that?
Well, I think so. AI has been a huge enabler of that. And I think actually we were talking kind of before about the Dunning-Kruger effect, like in terms of like, you go in with like full confidence thinking, yeah, this is pretty easy, and then you actually start and then you realize very quickly you hit a wall, and then that kind of forces you to kind of go back to the basics.
But you're coming out of that now.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's always like challenge after challenge, but I think now with AI, like learning these new processes and techniques becomes a lot easier.
I think AI is sort of, I think we're all learning together with AI actually, but AI is always there to teach you too. So if you know how to use it, you can always sort of teach yourself, and I think that's what you do. You don't know the classical methods, but I think maybe that's a sort of freedom. He's not set in the ways that I'm set in. So I have a way of doing things that might be more classically grounded. But he does things that are more maybe forward-looking. Maybe you want to talk about that.
I mean, like, I think like this session, like focusing on kind of like the pilot and things like one thing I've kind of learned through this process, which I think like I was telling Augustin what I was working on. And I was working on building a payment and billing infrastructure for my application. And I think Augustin probably had some kind of like advice for me, which maybe I didn't listen to as early as I should have. And I spent like 1 to 2 months just building out this one infrastructure element. And I actually thought that was going to be the easier part because it was like...
That's to do with payment, right?
Yeah, so that my users of my application can sign up, subscribe, pay with a credit card.
That sounds very logical. I make an app and I want to deal with payment. I want to collect money. Isn't that logical?
Well, I thought that would be the more straightforward piece because when you think about all the different capabilities that AI can do, and if you're building an AI-based application, you think that maybe those things are going to be the more challenging part.
And what did Augustin tell you to do?
He said don't spend time doing that.
So it's basically like multi-seat licensing. Like if you were to have that SaaS housed at an SME. When you go to SaaS, okay, so when you go to SaaS, they'll go like, they'll have a couple different plans, and then one of the plans is call us. Because that is the most, usually it's a bespoke thing, they have to do some monkey work in the back to get that building working. He was trying to actually implement and automate that.
Mm-hmm. And then what happened?
So I banged my head against my desk many, many times trying to get it to work. It's now working and that's live, but the reason why I think it's interesting to mention is because since then I've been able to add other new features to my application. For example, the agent can go out, search the web, and then enrich records within the CRM. That can be built in a day or 2 days to actually kind of build that really agentic functionality. Obviously there's some groundwork in there that enables those additional things to be added in. But really it's, you kind of think, oh, maybe the thing that sounds more simple, but is more like a infrastructure side, takes longer to set up than it does for what some of the more agentic things are.
One of the things I wanted to bring up was this concept of Pareto optimal. Well, it's just 80-20 rule. Okay, so basically, what is the 20% of effort that I need to expend to get the 80% of benefit? And I think in this example, it's, hey, Google Maps enrichment for your users in the chat window. That's relatively easy, but what a delightful user experience that would be. Whereas the other thing was sort of like there's really a lot of unknowns in that sort of billing thing, that's sort of like infrastructure, and maybe you want it because, and this is the thing, like we're entrepreneurs, so we want to focus on collecting money, obviously. And so we focus on that maybe as our instinct, but maybe we also need to balance that with what users want.
So we are definitely, like what we have today, what we have in mind is ROI, right? Return on investment.
Yes.
So what does it really take to turn an AI interest or intention into an actual business value? How do you do that?
You want me to take this back? Well, we all want like little I and big R, right? This is that's the secret.
Next to no investment and a lot of reward.
All I can say is this actually goes back to just standard software rollouts. I think it's very hard to measure ROI in reality. And so the way I like to think about things, especially with AI, is we should think about rolling out AI in terms of capability rather than functionality. And so it's a little bit woo and a little bit philosophical, but I feel like you really want these individual departments, because these agentic tools are so powerful, you actually want to enable them to do a lot of the self-service and maybe even the development. The tools aren't there yet, but they will get there. So we sort of need to shoot where things are going. That's sort of my perspective. But I also have another thing to talk about research.
So what you mean is in the past, like for a lot of corporate software, is actually that employee have to adapt to one standardization. But what you're telling me is that with this kind of surgical approach, that maybe is more customizable.
Yeah. So there's a Forrester article recently talking about AI thinkers, remember, where they rolled out something very efficiently using agentic tools like a custom HR system in 2 days. So you can actually develop code very quickly and adapt it very quickly with the state of the tools. And so you can have the software adapt to the users rather than the other way around, which is like what you've seen in SAP or.
But what Alex just told us was what seemingly to be simple and logical could take much longer. But what seems to be easy, like hard, could take only 2 days. What is going on?
Well, I think there's a slightly other angle to it, which is that, and it was I think on one of the slides before, strategy before code. I think as a human, we possess like the judgment and the taste, which AI doesn't necessarily have. So writing code nowadays is like, you can pretty much like say it's almost like free. It's becoming so cheap to actually produce the software and to ship it and to write the code. But actually knowing what to build and why, and like actually what's going to be useful, that really comes down to judgment that I think only we as humans have, at the moment anyway, at least. And that's like, I think the big thing that I think to focus on is like, if you know a particular area, you're the best person to decide what to build.
Yeah, and that's why I sort of stress like, you want to grow the capability within the domain or within the department. So the department has their domain expertise. That's the actual value now, right? So the code, guys like me.
So you have to be able to harness what the departments have. Like what do you normally, how do you normally do things? What would you wish that it would be to make your life easier?
And there's also uncertainty. So you need to be adaptable to. You need to enable these departments to be able to adjust. And that's why I feel like.
But how would those people be able to adjust? I have never coded in my life. What do I do?
Well, that's part that goes back to Cecilia's point about having the right people, right? So I don't want to say like everyone can do this. I don't want to paint a fantasy, but I think the goal is aspirational, right? We want to be able to get there. And so
yeah, the goal is to be able to put every $1 and get $2.75 back. Yeah.
I think if you are thinking of like how can AI help you and what can it do for you, I think yes, there's one thing which is knowing your area that you work in and the things that you have pain points. So when I was building and starting building my CRM, one of the things that I was when I was a salesperson is that I would frequently be on the road meeting clients. And I would maybe do 20 meetings within a week, and then I'd get back to the office, and then I'd need to sit down and manually enter everything into my CRM system. And by the time it comes to that, you've forgotten the key details, or maybe you just remember that 1 or 2 meetings where there was something important, but then everything else kind of gets put on the way by. Whereas I think now, if you use AI, you don't really have an excuse for those kind of things, because you can have that kind of like frictionless capture, and AI can help you recall those things. So I think that's like one like really important aspect.
So you basically use your experience in sales, and then ask yourself, what would I like that would make my life a lot easier, and then implement that into the softwares.
Yeah, so I'm using my real pain points that I experienced when I would, go on a 10-hour plane journey to another country, go on to 20 meetings, get back on the plane, and then on the Monday, my manager's asking me, so what did you discuss last week? What's the pipeline? What's the ROI from that trip? You can only remember like a few key things from that. We all have like limited context, just like AI has a context window. We all have like limited ability to recall things. So I came from that kind of angle, okay, how can AI help with this?
But how do you actually know what you want to do? Write down a list, or like how do you come up? You say you should know before what you build. Would you do that?
So you know, you can sit down and you can think, okay, what are the things that frustrate me the most? But I think on the other side is sometimes you might not necessarily know what AI is capable of until you know some of the key principles. So I would say I do think upskilling in the world of AI is really important. I think everybody should be using AI as much as possible. Like I know in the US, like in some big companies, they have like leaderboards of how many tokens people are burning, and then like they consider, you know, if you're at the top, that means you're using AI the most. That's obviously maybe not the best way to look at it, but I think you definitely want to be using AI as much as possible, because then you can know what is capable and then match that with your frustrations or pain points.
I wanted to follow on Alex's point about domain expertise. So mine is a bit of a meta domain expertise just because I've seen so many software deployments. So for me, it was about methodology in terms of how to deploy a piece of what I call surgical software. And
can you explain a little bit more on this?
It's a lot of, I mean, it starts with basics. It's actually a lot of requirements gathering. It starts off, well, I'm just me myself, so I use a lot of WhatsApp audio. I record, I get the critical spreadsheets, and before I write any piece of code, I do extensive transcriptions and shaping of the requirements. Then I have a very sort of intensive, maybe not as intensive as Alex's plan building, but you build a very expensive plan, and then once you do that, my design philosophy is I always add AI at the end. So I like to make sure that my data bones and my data model and my user flow are sensible and simple before adding any AI.
So like first of all, it's planning, right? Coming up with a very detailed plan. I mean, Alex, you are very detail oriented by nature, so maybe that's why. Should I bring up the terms vibe coding? As a vibe coder, you have very good results.
I was worried that term might come up because I really don't like it. I think like when vibe coding as a concept first came out, it's like writing code with AI. But it was also implied that you're in the vibes. You are just going with the flow, and you are saying, hey, tweak this here, tweak that there, but you're not really approaching it from a thorough plan. Whereas I think really, I actually prefer the term agentic engineering, because when you're building software or you're building anything, you want to start from the specification, you want to start from the strategy behind it, why are you actually doing that in the first place, and then going from a spec to a plan. And then that isn't really like going with the vibes or the flow. It's very different. But I think these days coding with AI has kind of almost become synonymous with vibe coding. But yes, I think that they work.
It does lead a bit back to taste, because when you are vibing, the idea is you're not doing a lot of communication maybe, but you're doing some kind of judgment. And that's one of the tricky things with something like taste, is it's sort of like...
What do you mean by taste?
Well, by definition, it's hard to describe, right? And that's why me...
I wear like really good fashion, right?
Exactly, like, well, I don't know what it is, proportions,
So like you mean, like that is terrible, because you said, hey, in order to build good software, I need good taste.
I don't want to make it sound elitist. I do think we might need to go back to an apprentice-master kind of apprenticeship. Meaning we need to learn things maybe more by observation and sort of subtle cues of like that. If you wanted to watch maybe Alexander do his planning session, someone might be able to get a lot out of that rather than Alex trying to exhaustively describe every single step, right?
The way I kind of see it is, I think like people have taste and have judgment, and AI doesn't. Like, because it's been trained on all the data on the internet, so they kind of seem to go back to the mean, to the average. So if you ask them for recommendations or ideas, it can be a good brainstorming partner, but what it might come up with in terms of the direction for your business, you know, might not be optimal, or it might sound very generic, or you kind of see that and you kind of cringe at it, and that's where I think kind of that taste kind of comes in, and that's like the judgment of people and experts in that area.
So taste is not just to do with arts and culture. Taste has to come with experience. Like in your case, your experience in sales, all the years of legwork, that developed a taste when it comes to building your own like software, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess we're running out of time, and please come to Hong Kong AI podcast, and you can get a full hour of interview.
That's right. Episode 1, episode 2.
And thank you very much.